The wedding was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. That's what everyone kept telling me. Anyway, their voices bright and reassuring as they bustled around me like bees in a garden. My mother, as she helped me into my dress, her hands trembling with emotion and her eyes glistening with tears she refused to let fall. My bridesmaids, as they adjusted my veil and fussed over my hair and told me I looked like a princess from a fairy tale. My friends, as they snapped photographs on their phones and made jokes about how nervous I looked and promised me that everything would be perfect. Every bride is nervous, they said, their voices overlapping in a chorus of reassurance. It's natural. It's part of the experience. Once you see him waiting for you at the altar, all your fears will melt away. You'll see. It's going to be the most beautiful day of your life. I wanted to believe them. I wanted to believe that the butterflies in my stomach were just nerves, that the strange, nagging feeling in the back of my mind was just pre-wedding jitters, that everything would be perfect once the ceremony began, and I saw James standing at the altar, waiting for me with that smile that always made my heart flutter. I had been dreaming about this day for my entire life, ever since I was a little girl playing dress-up in my mother's old wedding veil. I had been planning it for the past 18 months, obsessing over every detail from the flowers to the music to the exact shade of ivory on the tablecloths. I had chosen the perfect dress, the perfect venue, the perfect menu. I had written my vows, rehearsed my walk down the aisle, imagined the moment when I would say, "I do," to the man I loved more than anything in the world. It was supposed to be perfect. It was supposed to be the beginning of the rest of my life, the start of a new chapter with the man who had promised to love me forever. His name was James Morrison, and he was everything I had ever wanted. Kind, intelligent, ambitious, with a smile that could light up a room and a laugh that made my heart feel like it was expanding inside my chest. He had dark hair and warm brown eyes and a way of looking at me that made me feel like I was the most important person in the world. He was a successful architect, a partner at one of the most prestigious firms in the city, and he had a future that was bright and full of promise. We had met 3 years ago at a charity gala, a chance encounter that had felt like fate, like something out of a romantic movie. He had spilled champagne on my dress, apologized profusely, and then spent the rest of the evening making me laugh with his self-deprecating humor and his stories about his eccentric family. By the end of the night, I had given him my phone number. By the end of the month, we were inseparable. By the end of the year, I knew I wanted to spend the rest of my life with him. He had proposed on a beach at sunset, down on one knee in the sand, holding out a ring that sparkled in the fading light. I had said yes before he even finished the question, tears of joy streaming down my face, my heart so full of love that I thought it might burst. And now, 18 months later, here I was, standing in the vestibule of the church, waiting for the music to start, waiting for the doors to open, waiting for the moment when I would walk down the aisle and become his wife. My father was beside me, his arm linked through mine, his face stoic and unreadable. He had been quiet all morning, quieter than usual, and I had assumed it was just emotion. He was about to give away his only daughter, after all. It was a big moment for any father, a moment of pride and sorrow and the bittersweet awareness that his little girl was all grown up. But there was something in his eyes, something I hadn't seen before. A tension, a darkness, a weight that seemed to press down on him, bending his shoulders and furrowing his brow. I had noticed it earlier, when he first arrived at the church, and I had dismissed it as nerves. But now, standing beside him, waiting for the ceremony to begin, I couldn't ignore it anymore. "Daddy," I said softly, looking up at him. "Are you okay? You seem different. Is something wrong?" He didn't answer right away. His jaw was tight, his eyes fixed on the closed doors in front of us, as if he were staring at something far away, something that only he could see. The muscles in his face were tense, and I could see a pulse beating rapidly in his temple. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and strained, barely above a whisper, as if he were forcing the words out through a throat that didn't want to let them go. "I need to tell you something, Emily. Something I should have told you a long time ago. Something about James. Something about you. Something about the night you were born." My heart skipped a beat, and I felt a cold chill run down my spine. What about James? Daddy, what's wrong? You're scaring me. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could say another word, the music started. The organ swelled, the familiar notes of the wedding march filling the church with their solemn beauty, and the doors began to open. I could see the guests rising to their feet, could see the flower girl starting down the aisle with her basket of rose petals, could see James waiting for me at the altar, his face glowing with love and anticipation. This was the moment I had been waiting for. This was the moment I had dreamed about. This was supposed to be the beginning of the rest of my life. And then my father did something that would change everything. "Stop," he said, his voice loud and commanding, cutting through the music like a knife through silk. "Stop the ceremony. I need to say something. I need to tell the truth." The organ faltered and fell silent, the notes dying in the air like birds shot from the sky. The guests froze in place, their faces turning toward us with expressions of shock and confusion. The flower girl stopped halfway down the aisle, her basket of petals dangling from her hand, her small face scrunched up in bewilderment. The minister looked up from his book, his eyebrows raised in surprise. And James, my James, the man I was about to marry, stared at my father with an expression that I couldn't quite read. It was a mixture of surprise and fear and something else, something that looked almost like guilt, like the expression of a child who had been caught doing something wrong and was waiting for the punishment to come. "Dad, what are you doing?" I hissed, my face flushing with embarrassment and confusion. "This is my wedding. You can't just stop it. Everyone is watching. Please, let's just proceed with the ceremony. We can talk about whatever this is afterwards." But my father ignored me. He was looking at James now, his eyes blazing with an intensity one had never seen before, an intensity that transformed his familiar, kind face into something hard and dangerous. "You know why I'm doing this," he said, his voice steady and cold, each word measured and deliberate. "You know exactly why. You've known all along. Don't pretend you don't understand." James's face went pale, the color draining from his cheeks like water from a broken vessel. "Mr. Callahan, I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice trembling slightly despite his efforts to keep it steady. "Whatever this is, whatever misunderstanding has occurred, I'm sure we can resolve it later. Please, let's just continue with the ceremony. Emily and I love each other. That's all that matters." "No," my father said, and his voice was like a door slamming shut. "That's not all that matters. That's never been all that matters. You've been lying to her from the moment you met her, and I'm not going to let you make her your wife without her knowing the truth. She deserves better than that. She deserves better than you." I stared at my father, my mind reeling, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my temples. "What are you talking about?" I demanded, my voice rising with fear and frustration. "What lies? What truth? Daddy, you're not making any sense. Please, just tell me what's going on." My father turned to me, and for the first time, I saw the pain in his eyes. The pain that had been there all along, hidden beneath the surface, buried under years of silence and secrets. It was a deep, profound pain, the kind of pain that leaves permanent scars on the soul. "Emily," he said, his voice breaking, "there are things I never told you. Things I should have told you years ago, but I was too afraid. Too afraid of losing you. Too afraid of the truth. But now, standing here, watching you about to marry this man, I realize that the truth is the only thing that can save you. And I have to tell you, no matter what it costs me." "The truth about what?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Dad, what are you hiding from me? What could possibly be so terrible that you would stop my wedding to tell me?" He took a deep breath, a long, shuddering breath that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside him, and then he began to speak. And as he spoke, the world as I knew it crumbled around me. 26 years ago," he said, his voice low and steady, "on the night you were born, there was a fire. A terrible fire that destroyed the hospital where you were delivered. Your mother and I barely escaped with our lives. We were lucky, but there was another family, a family who wasn't so lucky. A family who lost their baby in that fire. A baby who was the same age as you, born on the same night, in the same hospital. A baby girl just like you." I listened, my heart pounding, my mind struggling to process what he was saying. The church was silent, so silent that I could hear the sound of my own breathing, the rustle of my wedding dress, the distant chirping of a bird outside the stained glass windows. Everyone was watching us, their faces a blur of shock and curiosity, but I barely noticed them. My entire attention was focused on my father, on the words that were spilling from his lips like water from a broken dam. What does that have to do with me? I asked, my voice shaking. What does any of this have to do with my wedding? With James? My father's grip on my arm tightened, and I could feel his hand trembling. The family who lost their baby was named Morrison, he said, and I felt a jolt of recognition at the name. James's name. James Morrison. The father of the baby who died was a man named William Morrison. He was a powerful man, wealthy and influential, the kind of man who was used to getting what he wanted. And he never recovered from the loss of his daughter. He became obsessed with the idea that she had somehow survived, that the hospital had made a mistake, that his baby was still out there somewhere. And he passed that obsession on to his children, his sons, his daughter, and eventually to his grandson. I felt the blood drain from my face, and the world seemed to tilt around me. His grandson? I repeated, my voice barely audible. Dad, what are you saying? Who is his grandson? My father looked at James, and his expression was filled with a terrible, cold fury. James Morrison, he said, his voice hard as stone, is the grandson of William Morrison. He grew up believing that his family's baby was stolen, that the hospital covered up a terrible mistake, that the child who was supposed to be his aunt was actually someone else entirely. And he has spent his entire adult life searching for that child. Searching for you. The silence that followed was absolute. It was not just the absence of sound, but a presence, a weight, a physical force that pressed down on everyone in the church. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud and insistent, pounding in my ears like a drum. I could feel the eyes of the guests on me, their stares like needles pricking my skin. And I could see James, my James, the man I loved, standing at the altar with his face as white as the lilies that decorated the church. Emily, he said, his voice trembling, I can explain. It's not what you think. I love you. I truly love you. Whatever my grandfather believed, whatever my family wanted, I fell in love with you for real. That has to count for something. Please, you have to believe me. But my father was not finished. He didn't meet you by accident, he said, his voice rising with anger. The charity gala, the spilled champagne, the chance encounter. It was all planned. All of it. He knew exactly who you were. He knew exactly where you would be. He engineered the entire thing so he could get close to you, so he could find out if you were really his long-lost aunt, the baby who was supposed to have died in that fire. I stared at James, searching his face for any sign that my father was wrong, any hint that this was all a terrible misunderstanding. But I saw only confirmation. The way he couldn't meet my eyes, the way his hands were shaking, the way he seemed to shrink under the weight of my father's accusations. The guilt was written all over his face, as clear as the words in the minister's book. Is it true? I whispered, my voice barely audible, the words catching in my throat. Did you plan our meeting? Did you know who I was from the beginning? Did you know that I might be your aunt? James opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again. For a long, terrible moment, he just stood there, his face a mask of anguish, his eyes filled with tears. Then, very quietly, so quietly I could barely hear him, he said, Yes, it's true. I knew who you were. I knew about the fire, about the mix-up, about my grandfather's obsession. I grew up hearing stories about the baby who was lost, the baby who might still be alive, the baby who was stolen from our family. And when I met you, when I saw you at that gala, I knew immediately that you were the one. You looked exactly like the pictures of my grandmother when she was young. I knew it had to be you. And you pursued me anyway? I demanded, my voice rising with a mixture of fury and heartbreak. You made me fall in love with you, knowing that we might be related? How could you do that? How could you look me in the eye and tell me you loved me when you were hiding something like this? Because I do love you, he said, his voice desperate and pleading. I love you more than I've ever loved anyone. And I thought if I told you the truth, you would leave me. And I couldn't bear that. I couldn't bear the thought of losing you. So I told myself that it didn't matter, that the DNA test might be wrong, that we could be happy together without ever knowing for sure. I convinced myself that love was more important than biology. And I still believe that, Emily. I still believe that our love is stronger than any blood tie. Love? My father spat, his voice dripping with contempt. You don't know the meaning of the word. You lied to her from the moment you met her. You manipulated her. You made her fall in love with a fantasy, a carefully constructed illusion designed to serve your family's obsession. That's not love. That's predation. I looked at my father, at the anger blazing in his eyes, and then at James, at the desperation written on his face. And I realized, with a terrible, crushing clarity, that my entire relationship had been built on a foundation of lies. The man I loved, the man I was supposed to marry, had been deceiving me from the very beginning. Every moment we had shared, every laugh, every kiss, every whispered promise, had been tainted by the knowledge that he was hiding something from me. Something enormous. Something unforgivable. Dad, I said, my voice shaking. I need you to tell me everything. I need to know the whole story. Right now? My father nodded, and I saw tears in his eyes, tears that he had been holding back for 26 years. The night you were born, he said, his voice low and steady. There was a mix-up at the hospital. 2 babies, born at the same time, in the same ward. You and the Morrison baby. The nurses were overwhelmed. The fire was spreading, and there was chaos. And in the confusion, they made a mistake. They handed your mother the wrong baby. They handed her the Morrison baby. And they handed the Morrison family you. I felt the world tilt around me, and I grabbed onto my father's arm to keep from falling. What are you saying? I demanded, my voice rising. Dad, what are you telling me? Are you saying that I'm not your daughter? I'm telling you the truth, he said, and his voice broke on the words. You're not my daughter by blood, Emily. You're the daughter of William Morrison, the baby who was supposed to have died in that fire. That baby was my real daughter, my biological daughter, and she died. She died in the fire, and I've been living with that grief for 26 years. But I've also been living with you, and I've loved you every single day, as if you were my own. Because in my heart, you are my own. You've always been my own. The words didn't make sense. They refused to arrange themselves into any pattern I could understand. I stared at my father, at the man who had raised me, who had taught me to ride a bike and drive a car and believe in myself, and I saw a stranger. But I also saw the same man who had always been there for me, through every triumph and every failure, through every joy and every sorrow. He was my father, not by blood, but by love. And that, I realized, was what truly mattered. But if I'm not your daughter, I said slowly, my mind struggling to process the implications, and James is the grandson of William Morrison, then that means James and I are related by blood. My father finished, his voice heavy with sorrow. He's your nephew, your biological brother's son. If you marry him, you'll be marrying your own blood relative. I looked at James, at the man I had planned to spend my life with, and I felt something inside me shatter. The love I had felt, the trust, the hope for the future, all of it crumbled into dust. He had known. He had known the truth all along, and he had pursued me anyway. He had planned our meeting, manipulated my feelings, made me fall in love with him, all while knowing that we were related by blood. The betrayal was so profound, so complete, that I felt like I was drowning in it. Emily, he said, reaching out toward me, his hand trembling. Please, let me explain. It's not as simple as it sounds. The DNA test, it wasn't conclusive. There's still a chance that you're not really my aunt. There's still a chance that this is all a mistake, that the hospital didn't mix up the babies, that my grandfather's obsession was just paranoia. Please, just give me a chance to prove myself to you. Let me do my own DNA test. Let me prove that we're not related. Let me prove that our love is real. But I stepped back, away from his outstretched hand, away from the man who had betrayed me in the worst possible way. There's no chance, I said, my voice cold and dead. There's no explanation. There's no proof that could make this right. You lied to me. You manipulated me. You made me fall in love with you, knowing that we might be related. How could you do that? How could you look me in the eye and tell me you loved me when you were hiding something like this? Because I do love you, he said, and his voice cracked with emotion. I love you more than I've ever loved anyone. And I thought if I told you the truth, you would leave me. And I couldn't bear that. I couldn't bear the thought of losing you. So I convinced myself that it didn't matter. I convinced myself that we could be happy together, that our love was strong enough to overcome any obstacle. I was wrong. I know that now. I was so wrong. You never had me, I said, and the words felt like broken glass in my mouth. Not really, because the person you fell in love with was a lie. The person you were pursuing was a mystery, a puzzle, a ghost from your family's past. You didn't love me. You loved the idea of me, the idea of finding your long-lost aunt, the idea of solving the mystery that had haunted your family for decades. You loved the chase, not the person. James opened his mouth to respond, but my father stepped between us, his face hard and protective. Get out, he said, his voice low and dangerous. Get out of this church. Get out of this town. And never come near my daughter again. If you do, I'll make sure everyone knows what you did. I'll make sure your family's obsession becomes public knowledge. I'll make sure your name is ruined forever. Do you understand me? James looked at me one last time, his eyes pleading, his face streaked with tears. Emily, please, don't do this. I know I made mistakes, but my love for you is real. You have to believe that. You have to give me another chance. But I just shook my head, tears streaming down my face, my heart breaking into a million pieces. I don't know what to believe anymore, I said. But I know I can't marry you. Not now. Not ever. The man I loved was a lie. The life I planned was a fantasy. And I need to figure out who I really am without you. And with that, I turned and walked away. Out of the church. Out of the wedding. Out of the life I had planned. The guests watched me go, their faces a blur of shock and confusion. My bridesmaids called my name, their voices high and desperate. My mother sobbed, her cries echoing through the silent church. The flower girl burst into tears, her basket of petals clattering to the floor. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I just kept walking, away from the man I loved, and the father who had lied to me, and the truth that had destroyed everything. The days that followed were the darkest of my life. I locked myself in my apartment, refusing to see anyone, refusing to answer the phone, refusing to eat or sleep or do anything except stare at the wall and replay the events of that terrible day in my mind. The man I loved was my nephew. The father I adored was not my father. My entire identity, everything I thought I knew about myself, was a lie. I felt like I was falling, tumbling through space with nothing to hold on to, no anchor to keep me grounded. But slowly, gradually, I began to heal. I started with the truth. I demanded DNA tests from both families, and the results were conclusive. I was a Morrison, the child who had died in that fire. The child who was supposed to be William Morrison's daughter had been my father's biological daughter. And I, the child he had raised, was the Morrison baby. The mix-up had been real. The fire had been real. And the consequences had echoed through two families for a quarter of a century. I met my biological family. The Morrisons were wealthy and influential, the kind of family that had its name on buildings and its face in the society pages. They welcomed me with open arms, eager to claim the long-lost daughter who had been stolen from them. But it was strange, sitting at their table, looking at their faces, trying to find myself in their features. They were strangers to me, no matter how much DNA we shared. The man I had called Dad for 26 years was still the man I loved and trusted, even if he wasn't my blood relative. The healing took time. It took months of therapy, of difficult conversations, of slowly piecing together a new identity from the fragments of the old one. But eventually, I began to see the truth clearly. I was Emily Callahan. I was the daughter of the man who had raised me, the man who had loved me unconditionally, the man who had risked everything to tell me the truth on my wedding day. And I was also Emily Morrison, the daughter of a family I was still learning to know. Both identities were real. Both were part of who I was. And as for James, I never saw him again. He left town shortly after the failed wedding, and I heard through mutual acquaintances that he had moved across the country, trying to escape the scandal that had engulfed our families. Part of me still loved him, even though I knew it was wrong. Part of me still missed him, even though I knew he had betrayed me. But I pushed those feelings down, buried them deep, and focused on rebuilding my life. The wedding day was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. And in a way it was, because it was the day I learned the truth. It was the day I discovered who I really was. It was the day I began, slowly and painfully, to become the person I was meant to be.